My wife's favorite college professor is the man who got me expelled years ago. I never thought I'd set foot in Westbridge College again, let alone collect a paycheck from them, yet here I was, 10 years later, wearing a staff badge, and fixing the damn projector in room 214. The irony wasn't lost on me. My job title was IT and Facilities Tech, but really, I was the guy you called when someone spilled coffee into a USB port, or couldn't figure out how to turn off caps lock. It was quiet work, invisible work, and I liked it that way. After everything that happened back then, anonymity suited me. Sophie, my wife, had no idea. She thought I chose this job to be closer while she started her master's program in philosophy here. Which wasn't entirely a lie, just not the whole truth. I didn't want to start her journey with the baggage of my ruined past. We moved into a tiny off-campus apartment, boxes still unpacked. Sophie was glowing with excitement. She loved academia, the libraries, the debates, the smell of old books and chalk. "I signed us up for the welcome lecture tonight," she said over breakfast, pouring 2 cups of burnt coffee. "It's just a thing the philosophy department does for new grad students and partners. I thought it'd be fun." "Sure," I said. I had no idea what was coming. That evening we walked into Hanover Hall, one of those ancient lecture theaters that smelled like dust and leather-bound arrogance. Wood-paneled walls, creaky old desks, and stained glass windows showing dead philosophers I only vaguely remembered. The place was packed. I sat beside Sophie in the 3rd row as she scanned the schedule. "Ellis Grant," she whispered, almost giddy. "He's doing the keynote. He's like the guy here. Apparently he writes papers that even other professors quote." My stomach dropped. No, it couldn't be. I hadn't heard that name in a decade. But I remembered it. Ellis Grant, professor of ethics and philosophy. 10 years ago he'd stood in front of a disciplinary committee and said I made him uncomfortable. That I'd been too personal in emails. That I'd shown up outside his office uninvited. He'd weaponized vague language to suggest something improper without ever actually saying it. There was no real case, but there was enough innuendo to destroy me. I lost my scholarship. I lost my place at the college. I lost the trust of my family, who never quite looked at me the same again. And now, he walked out onto the stage, with the same smug smile, the same silver hair, the same goddamn sweater over the shoulders like some Ivy League cliché. The room erupted in applause. I sat frozen. "Isn't he incredible?" Sophie said, leaning in. "He's published in The Atlantic, the Times literary supplement. Oh, and he once debated Sam Harris." I looked at her and tried to smile. Ellis Grant adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and said, "Tonight I want to talk about truth. And more importantly, moral courage." The laughter that escaped my mouth wasn't loud, but it was enough for Sophie to glance at me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Just déjà vu." He spoke for nearly an hour, eloquent, confident, full of clever references and philosophical name-dropping. I barely heard a word. All I could think about was that office, that moment when he looked me in the eye and lied without blinking. I remembered pleading with the dean to read my actual emails to check the context. But no one cared. Grant had tenure. I was disposable. Now he was being cheered for moral clarity. I clenched my jaw. When the lecture ended, the room gave him a standing ovation. He smiled modestly, said thank you, and stepped down from the podium. Sophie grabbed my arm. "Let's go say hi. I want to introduce you." I panicked. "No, I mean, let's not bother him. He's probably swamped." She looked disappointed but didn't push it. Outside the night air was cool. I walked a little ahead of her, needing space. "Babe," she called. "You sure you're okay?" I turned back. She looked so happy, so proud to be here. I couldn't tell her. "Not yet." "Yeah," I said. "It's just weird being back on campus. Brings up old memories." She smiled. "Well, it's a new chapter now, for both of us." I nodded. But inside I was already turning pages in the wrong direction, because Ellis Grant wasn't just a memory. He was back. And this time, I wasn't the same naive student he could bury. Back home, Sophie was still buzzing from the lecture. Her voice had that excited edge it only got when she was talking about ideas. Or people who had them. "He's just brilliant," she said, kicking off her shoes and curling her legs underneath her on the couch. The way he talked about moral absolutism versus contextual ethics, it made me want to write again. Really write, you know? I nodded from the kitchen, stirring 2 mugs of chamomile tea, watching the steam rise. Anything to keep my hands busy. Anything to give me an excuse not to look directly at her. "He's got this clarity," she continued, opening her laptop. "Like not just academic smarts, something deeper. He makes you feel like thinking is a form of hope." I brought her the tea and sat on the armchair across from her. Our living room was small but cozy, full of books, notepads, pens that had long since run dry but still sat in cups. Our kind of place. Until now. "Sounds like you're already a fan," I said, trying to keep it light. She smiled. "Everyone is. You should see the way other students talk about him. Like he's some kind of philosopher king." Her eyes sparkled when she said it. That sparkle, it wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was reverence, the kind that sticks, the kind that blinds. I'd seen that look before. Once upon a time, it was on my own face. He had this way of listening to you like your words actually mattered, even as he dismantled them piece by piece. You came out of the conversation convinced you were smarter just for having lost the argument. And now, he was doing it again. Only this time, with the woman I loved. "Listen to this," Sophie said, tapping at her keyboard. "We had to submit a short essay on Kant for the welcome seminar. Nothing formal, just a getting to know your brain kind of thing. Look what he wrote on mine." She turned the screen toward me. I leaned forward. There it was, in clean, confident strokes under the printed text. Remarkably mature analysis. You ask the right questions, stay curious. Egg. I felt a twist in my gut. "It's not even that good," Sophie said with a sheepish laugh. "I wrote it in like 2 hours. But he noticed the nuances. He gets what I was trying to say." I nodded again. Still smiling, still calm on the outside, but inside, something was crawling up my spine, a cold certainty. He was doing it again, the praise, the intimacy of tone, the slow build of intellectual intimacy that made you feel chosen, special, different, until you were caught in his web, unsure of how you got there. And what then? What would he accuse her of, or worse, what would he let her believe about herself? Sophie kept talking, reading bits of the essay aloud, laughing at her own sentences. I watched her hands, how animated they were, how her cheeks flushed when she spoke about his comments. She wasn't in love with him, not yet, but he had her mind, and with people like Grant, that's always step 1. "You okay?" she asked, finally noticing my silence. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired, long day." She smiled and closed her laptop. "You'll like him more once you get to know him. He's not as intimidating as he seems." I forced a laugh. "Oh, I'm not intimidated. No, I was something worse. I was familiar." Later that night when she was asleep I sat alone at the kitchen table. I looked around our apartment, the shelves filled with our books, the Polaroids pinned to the fridge, the blanket we fought over on the couch. And I imagined it all unraveling. I imagined her sitting in his office, laughing at some clever reference. I imagined him leaning forward, telling her how brilliant she was, how rare, how misunderstood by everyone else, just like he told me. And I imagined her believing it. I opened my laptop and pulled up the staff directory. Grant was still listed under the philosophy department, office 305B, same as before. I stared at his name, his smug little portrait photo beside it. 10 years ago, I walked out of this school in shame, carrying a box of my things and the weight of an accusation I didn't deserve. Now I had keys to every server room in this building. Let's see how smart the philosopher really is when someone's watching him from behind the curtain. The thing about paranoia is, Once it takes root, it grows fast. By Monday morning I was already back on campus, earlier than usual. The corridors were still quiet, the classrooms empty except for the faint hum of old radiators and overworked vending machines. My footsteps echoed in the tech wing as I made my way toward the basement level, where no students ever came unless they were lost or on the wrong side of a prank. The server room didn't look like much, just racks of blinking lights and wires like tangled veins, stretching across the cold, sterile walls. But down here, everything passed through us. Every email, every device ping, every late-night Google search about Nietzsche explained for dummies, and I had clearance to see it all. I logged into the internal admin console and began isolating Professor Grant's IP address. Each faculty member's campus laptop had a unique identifier tied to our Wi-Fi. It didn't take long to find his, tagged neatly, Grant EGFE. I followed it into the logs, logins, times, places, usage heat maps. He spent a lot of late nights logged into the remote server from his office. Nothing unusual. Philosophy professors are nocturnal by nature. But then I cross-referenced those sessions with our auto backup system. See, most people don't realize how deep the backups go. Every auto-saved draft, every deleted message, they lived, briefly, in our system. We didn't store personal data, not officially. But if someone with the right clearance wanted to peek, let's just say plausible deniability is baked into the wiring. I pulled up his communications folder, hundreds of messages, students past and present, a mess of attachments and feedback notes. It was like stepping into a cocktail party of half-written ideas and praise-dripping flattery. Then I filtered for the name Sophie, my wife. And suddenly the room felt 10 degrees colder. There were 16 emails over the course of the last 2 weeks. I opened the first. Sophie, your insights during last week's seminar reminded me why I still enjoy teaching. There's a clarity in your mind that refuses to settle for shallow truths. Don't let the system dull that. Harmless? Maybe. But flattering. Too flattering. I moved to the next. Have you considered discussing some of your Kantian questions one-on-one? Some things are better untangled in private conversation. Private. Right. And another. You seem to wrestle with the same dualities I did at your age. Brilliance and doubt, fire and restraint. That's not a flaw, it's what makes you fascinating. My stomach turned. He wasn't just teaching her. He was performing. Seducing through intellect. Wrapping compliments in philosophy, like arsenic in chocolate. I checked the timestamps. Some messages were sent close to midnight, others just minutes after Sophie had gone to bed beside me. Of course he wasn't stupid. He never crossed an explicit line. No, let's meet at my apartment. No, I think about you when I grade. But it was all there, in the tone. In the spaces between his words. The little phrases, intimacy of thought, personal resonance, our shared instincts. He was grooming her. Just like he had groomed me. Only this time, he was more careful, more evolved. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. The hum of machines around me sounded suddenly hostile. I was sitting in a fortress of surveillance, and yet I felt completely exposed. I didn't want to believe it. Part of me had hoped I was just spiraling, projecting old wounds onto coincidence. But these messages weren't just flattery. They were curated, intentional, a slow intellectual drip designed to pull her closer, to make her feel exceptional. And once she believed she was exceptional, and he the only one who saw it, he'd move in closer. He always did. I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was to print everything, burst into our apartment and show Sophie the receipts. But I knew that wouldn't work. She'd see it as overreaction, invasion, jealousy, maybe even paranoia. He was a master of plausible deniability, and I, the disgraced former student with a grudge. No, I needed more. Patterns, voice recordings maybe, visual proof. So I began setting up surveillance. I routed the campus Wi-Fi logs through an isolated node, So if he tried any encrypted private chats, I'd still see the metadata. Then I checked the office camera. Every professor had one in their hallway for security, and I had access. But Grant's hallway cam? Disabled. Intentionally. By the end of the day I had built a small digital trap. Nothing illegal. Nothing that couldn't be chalked up to routine security maintenance. But I'd know when he logged in. I'd know who visited his office and for how long. And if he made a move, any move, I'd be there to catch it. I closed the console and looked up at the flickering fluorescent lights. This wasn't just about Sophie anymore. This was war. The cursor blinked at me like a metronome, ticking time I couldn't get back. It was 2:47 a.m. The kitchen was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of our old pipes. Sophie was asleep in the next room, wrapped in a blanket of trust I no longer felt worthy of sharing. I sipped from a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. My laptop glowed against the tiled wall, illuminating a window into a past I'd buried a decade ago. The college archives weren't easy to access, even for someone with my clearance. But there were back doors, auto-archived administrative records, forgotten PDFs of old academic rosters, digital footprints too obscure to be sanitized. And I found myself in them. Malcolm R. Ellis, student ID 402118th, GPA 3096, Dean's List, Honors Program. I clicked through course logs, recommendations, papers I barely remembered writing. My essays had been praised, my name appeared in club lists, seminar rosters, peer mentoring programs. And then, abruptly, nothing. Fall semester, sophomore year, philosophy of ethics with Professor Ellis Grant. Attendance perfect. Participation high. I remembered that class. I remembered the heat in the room, the tension in the air. I remembered asking him a question that wasn't in the textbook. Something that made a few students shift in their chairs. I'd challenged him. Not rudely, just directly. Is it ethical, I had asked, for a tenured professor to use charisma to dominate the intellectual space, shutting down dissent under the guise of mentorship? I'd meant it as an honest question. I hadn't even named him. But his eyes had hardened in a way I still see in my dreams. He'd responded with calm authority, of course. Everyone had laughed. I was the one who'd overstepped. I was the young rebel who didn't understand how academia worked. 2 weeks later the email came. It was short, cold, no subject line, just a timestamp and a file attached. A female student has reported feeling uncomfortable due to Malcolm Ellis's behavior in and outside of class. She described persistent attention, unsolicited messages, and inappropriate comments. Due to the sensitive nature of the complaint, and the student's request for anonymity, a hearing will not be scheduled. Your enrollment is hereby terminated effective immediately. No hearing, no defense, just silence, and a hole in my life where everything had been. I had begged for an appeal. I wrote letters to the dean, to the department chair, even to Grant himself, thinking maybe he'd intervene, speak for me, help me understand. No one responded. My scholarship vanished, so did the internship lined up for summer. My parents, confused and embarrassed, withdrew into disappointment. Friends stopped returning messages. My roommate moved out within days. I remembered sitting in that same kitchen, 10 years younger, stunned, as if my future had been stolen mid-sentence. Now, staring at the same glow of a laptop screen, I realized what had really happened. That anonymous student? I would never know if she even existed, but I finally understood. I had embarrassed Grant in front of others. I'd bruised his ego. And he didn't forgive bruises, he erased them. I wasn't the first. Maybe not even the 10th. If he had access to students' trust, their vulnerabilities, their thoughts, he could manipulate outcomes easily. All he needed was a whisper, a vague concern, and the system, built to protect reputations more than people, did the rest. I scrolled further, searching for similar patterns. There were 2 other students, names I vaguely remembered. Both had dropped out after taking Grant's class. One had filed a transfer request mid-semester, citing academic hostility. The other simply vanished from the records after an incomplete due to disciplinary issue. No details, just gaps, like deleted chapters. My chest tightened. All this time, I had carried the shame of that expulsion like a scar I'd earned. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong without realizing it. That I'd been too intense, too loud, too emotional. But now, I saw the truth for what it was. I had been silenced, efficiently, strategically. And now Sophie was in his classroom, eyes shining, heart open. Just like I had been. I closed the laptop gently, as if afraid to wake the ghosts. My hands trembled as I reached for the coffee again. It was still cold. Tomorrow, I would go back to work, back to the wires and screens and cameras. But tonight, I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, staring into the quiet space where my old life used to be. And I made a promise. This time, I wouldn't be erased. Sophie's message popped up on my phone just as I was about to leave work. Professor Grant invited me to his house for a private discussion about my essay. He says he wants to explore it on a deeper level. What do you think? My heart skipped. Invited to his home? That wasn't part of any syllabus I'd ever heard of. Maybe it's just an academic thing, I texted back. Philosophy professors can be intense. Don't read too much into it. But inside, my mind was already racing. When Sophie left that evening, I sat by my laptop, fingers trembling. I wanted to tell her to cancel, to run, to never go. But I didn't. Instead, I fired up the professor's laptop I had managed to access earlier. The service program, still running quietly in the background, captured everything: audio, video, even keystrokes. I pressed record. The moment Sophie stepped inside Grant's study, I could hear the creak of the heavy wooden door. Soft rain tapped against the window panes. A classical piano sonata drifted faintly in the background. The room smelled of old books, polished wood, and expensive wine. Grant's voice was calm, cultured, smooth. The voice that had once silenced a room full of students. "Sophie, your essay," he began, "is remarkable. Your insights into Plato's allegory of the cave show an impressive grasp of abstract thought." I clenched my fists. "But," he continued, "I think there is an element you haven't fully explored, the connection between minds. The cave is more than a metaphor for ignorance. It's a space where true intimacy between thinkers is born." Sophie's voice, polite but cautious, responded, "I tried to focus on the political symbolism, Professor. I'm not sure I follow." Grant chuckled softly. "That's where philosophy transcends the page, Sophie. It's a dance between souls, a special union beyond mere words." I bit my lip, my blood boiling. He was framing this, the dance between souls, as something special, something intimate, a philosophical connection that was really a seduction. Grant quoted Socrates next. "Consider this," he said, voice low and almost conspiratorial. "In Plato's Symposium, Socrates speaks of eros, not just as desire, but as a striving for higher understanding. The eros between minds is a sacred pursuit, one that invites closeness, vulnerability, even love." Sophie shifted. "I appreciate that perspective. But I'm here to learn, not to engage on that level," she said firmly. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "I admire your professionalism. But one must acknowledge that true philosophy demands vulnerability. To open oneself fully, mind and heart." I sat frozen, hearing my wife resist, but not shut him down entirely. There was a pause. Then Sophie's voice, a little quieter. "I want to respect the boundaries of our teacher-student relationship." Grant's tone softened. "And boundaries, Sophie, are only as strong as we allow them to be. Sometimes those boundaries are meant to be tested, challenged, transcended." The implication hung in the air, as heavy as the rain outside. I wanted to scream at her to leave. I wanted to delete the recording. But I couldn't. The calm menace in Grant's voice, the way he wrapped manipulation in layers of intellectualism, made me sick. Sophie responded again, firm but polite. "I'm grateful for your guidance, Professor. I'll reflect on your thoughts carefully." The conversation ended with the clinking of a wine glass. This was exactly what had happened to me. The same subtle seduction, disguised as mentorship. The same manipulation, cloaked in intellectual prose. Only now it was Sophie. And I wasn't sure how to protect her from a man who wielded words like weapons. I glanced at the rain outside, watching droplets race down the window. Philosophy, Grant had said, was about truth and morality, but the truth I was seeing was uglier than any theory. That night, I lay awake next to Sophie, listening to her soft breaths. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about Grant's ideas. But I knew beneath that sparkle was a storm she didn't understand, and a danger I was only beginning to see. I knew I couldn't just sit back and watch. Grant's subtle seduction wasn't just philosophical musings, it was a calculated game, and Sophie was the next player on his board. But how to stop a man like that? Someone wrapped in respectability, shielded by intellect and charm? I had to get inside his world. Not physically, but through his own weapons, words. That night, I stayed up late in the IT center, surrounded by humming servers and blinking lights. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I crafted something carefully calculated, an essay, under the name of a fictional student. I titled it The Ethics of Intellectual Seduction, a case study. In it, I subtly wove phrases lifted directly from the private emails Grant had sent to his students, especially the ones to Sophie. Lines about the special union of minds, the dance of eros between souls, and the boundaries meant to be transcended. I crafted it to sound academic but with an undercurrent of discomfort, a mirror held up to the professor's words. Once the essay was polished, I submitted it through the official student portal, anonymously. Days passed, and then I saw it. Professor Ellis Grant had praised the essay publicly. On the philosophy department website, under student highlights, the essay was posted as an exemplary exploration of ethical philosophy. His commentary was glowing. "Remarkably mature insights," he wrote. "A brave examination of eros and ethics." My stomach twisted. The Trojan horse was inside. 2 days later, while I was quietly monitoring the campus network, a message popped up from one of Grant's colleagues, Professor Janice Hart. "Malcolm, have you seen this?" she asked in the faculty chat. I clicked the link. Janice had noticed something. The essay contained multiple verbatim phrases lifted from private emails Grant had sent to various students. She had spotted an uncomfortable pattern. "Why are personal messages being cited here?" she asked. "Ellis, can you explain?" For the first time in years I saw the cracks in his armor. He tried to laugh it off. "It's an academic exercise," he claimed. "Perhaps a student's misguided attempt to challenge my work." Janice pressed harder. "This isn't just theory anymore, Ellis. It's your personal correspondence, private and confidential." His reputation, carefully built over decades, was now under threat. Back in the IT center I leaned back, exhausted but hopeful. The Trojan horse had worked. The seeds of doubt were planted. If the faculty started questioning Grant, maybe they'd look closer. Maybe Sophie would see him as I did. Not just a brilliant mind, but a manipulator hiding behind a cloak of philosophy. That night, I returned home to Sophie. She was glowing again, eyes bright as she spoke of Grant's inspiring intellect. I held my tongue. For now. It didn't take long. Once the whispers started, they spread like wildfire. Students I barely knew began coming forward, sharing stories of strange encounters with Professor Grant, messages that were a little too personal, comments in class that lingered longer than they should have, invitations to private meetings that felt less academic and more predatory. I sat in the corner of a crowded campus cafe, scrolling through anonymous posts on a student forum. They talked about the way he looks at you, the offhand compliments that unsettle, the hidden expectations behind the praise. I saved every single one. I compiled them all into a folder and sent them, anonymously, to the college administration. But I didn't stop there. From the dusty archives I pulled out even more emails, letters from Grant to students over the years. Subtle invitations disguised as philosophical musings, gently veiled pressure to cross boundaries. And then, I sent copies of those emails to Sophie. I waited, heart pounding. Days passed before she finally confronted me. We sat in our cramped living room, the low hum of the city outside our windows, the weight of unspoken truths pressing between us. She held her phone tightly, scrolling back through the messages. Her eyes widened as she recognized a passage from the letter she had read months ago. The same charming, intellectual words that once made her heart flutter. "It was all a game," she whispered, voice trembling. I nodded. Yes, a twisted game. The shock on her face was raw and real. For a moment the room felt like it was closing in around us. But then, slowly, her expression shifted, from shock to clarity, and finally, to alliance. "I'm sorry I didn't see it before," she said quietly. "I was blinded by admiration." I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "We'll get through this," I promised. Back on campus, the news was spreading fast. Faculty meetings turned into heated debates. Grant's closest colleagues avoided eye contact. The administration was forced to open an investigation. In the faculty lounge, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Hushed conversations, nervous glances, and a palpable fear that their esteemed professor's carefully built reputation was crumbling. Sophie and I stayed home that night, the silence between us heavy but honest. For the first time in weeks we talked openly, about the past, the lies, the fear, about trust, and about how, despite everything, we still had each other. The road ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear. The man who once destroyed my life was finally facing the consequences, and Sophie was no longer under his spell. My wife's favorite college professor is the man who got me expelled years ago. I never told Sophie the full truth at first. I didn't want to drag her into the mess, didn't want to scare her off before she even got started at the university. But now, as we sat together in the dim glow of our living room, shadows from the streetlight filtering through the curtains, the time had come. I had to come clean. "Sophie," I began, voice low, careful, "there's something I need to tell you. About Ellis Grant." She looked up from her book, eyes curious but tired. I knew who he was from the start. Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years pressing down. "When you got accepted here, I started watching him. I used the campus network, the security systems. I hacked into his laptop." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You spied on him and me?" I nodded, shame flooding me. "I did. I couldn't trust him. And honestly, I couldn't trust myself. I had to know what he was doing, what he was saying to you." Sophie's face was a mix of hurt and relief. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to protect you without dragging you into my past. I thought if I stayed silent it would be easier for you. But I was wrong." She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "So the essay, the Trojan horse, that was you?" I met her gaze. "Yes, I created that essay using phrases from his letters. I needed to expose him before he could do more damage." She was silent for a long moment, the tension thick between us. Then she said, "I'm hurt that you didn't trust me enough to tell the truth. But I understand why you did it." Her voice softened. "You said you wanted to protect me, but you should have trusted me to handle it." I swallowed hard. "I've lost so much because of him before. My scholarship, my friends, my reputation. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." Tears glistened in her eyes. "And you really thought I could have fallen for him? That I might have betrayed you?" I looked down, ashamed. "I won't pretend I didn't have those fears." She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "I forgive you. But if we're going to move forward, you have to promise me one thing." "What?" "Be honest with me, always. No more secrets." I nodded, feeling the weight lift just a little. "I promise." We embraced quietly, the tension melting into something fragile but real. A shared understanding born from pain and trust. No dramatic words, no shouting. Just two people trying to rebuild what was broken, step by step. Outside, the rain started tapping against the window, washing away the shadows of the past. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. The investigation was swift, merciless, and final. Ellis Grant, my wife's favorite professor, and the man who had destroyed my life years ago, was gone. They said he left of his own accord, but everyone knew better. The emails, the testimonies from students, the leaked messages, they were a damning chorus no one could ignore. Several students came forward officially, courage shining through the fear and doubt. His reputation crumbled like ancient plaster. In the quiet aftermath, the university brass approached me. A permanent position they offered, a reward for uncovering the truth and standing up to the man who had abused his power for far too long. I looked at the offer. Polite but firm, I declined. There's nothing left for me here, I told them. It wasn't bitterness, really. It was closure, a chapter that needed to end. Sophie and I agreed it was time for a pause, to breathe, to heal, to reclaim what had been stolen from us. We planned a trip, a journey far away from the echoes of lecture halls and whispered scandals. But before we left, I wanted one last moment, a quiet reckoning. I walked through the campus in the soft spring sunlight, past blooming trees and buzzing bees. The place had changed, but some things remained, the faint scent of old books, the creak of wooden seats in the lecture hall. I stepped inside the now empty auditorium where it all began, where Ellis Grant's voice once filled the air, shaping minds while twisting truths. I sat down in the same seat I had occupied that night, the night Sophie first brought me to that lecture. The warm light filtering through tall windows cast gentle patterns on the worn floorboards. A small smile tugged at my lips. "You taught me philosophy, Ellis," I whispered softly, voice echoing in the quiet. "But I've become better than you. No grand speeches, no dramatic confrontations. Just a simple truth, spoken to the empty room, a promise that I would not be defined by his shadows." Later, I met Sophie outside, her eyes bright with hope and the promise of new beginnings. We loaded our bags into the car, the engine humming softly, ready to carry us forward. As the campus disappeared behind us, I glanced over at her, feeling the weight lift and freedom settle in my chest. This was our moment, not of revenge, but of release, of growth, of finally moving on.